Good morning. Thanks for tuning in. This is Robert Braathe. I've set up a chat window in the right-hand side here for any questions you may have, and we'll get started. I see we have no viewers at the moment, but we'll give it another moment or two to get rolling. We'll get started in about 1 minute. I know there's a couple people we're waiting on. My name is Robert Braathe, and today I'm going to talk to you about some fundamentals of project management. Go through some slides. We'll have plenty of time for question and answer. There is a group chat feature here set up on the right, so feel free to type in your questions as they come up, and I definitely welcome them as we go through the material. Project management is something I really am passionate about. I think it's really the glue that ties in a lot of things together. And today I'll go over some of the basic fundamentals, answer some questions that come up, and definitely provide you with some best practices we've used both here at Braathe Enterprises and in some of my work at the local colleges and with clients. So project, a complete non-routine one-time effort with certain limitations. Project clearly has an established objective, should have a lifespan with a clear beginning and an end. And I think a lot of times that's where projects go wrong. Requires that everybody across the board participates. Involves doing something that might not have ever been done before. Can be a big characteristic of a project, and will have specific time, cost, and performance requirements. Projects can be everything from something that may only take a half hour to something that might be over a multi-year period. One of the biggest projects I got to see live was a project called the Big Dig, which was a event that took probably decades to complete. Cost overruns, time overruns, and the scope of the project seemed to get out of hand. So it was quite uh, quite ridiculous in terms of the results that happened. Um, there are 5 general phases of a project life cycle: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. When I've seen the best projects out there, it's really been spending double the amount of time, maybe 2 to 4% versus 1% of the time in the initiating phase. Planning, you can't plan enough. Most of the time, I see where most projects go wrong is, in that initiating phase, not getting the right team together, not getting the right plan together, and not taking enough time to get those first 2 stages done. You're going to spend the bulk of your time executing, so that's going to really take up most of your project time. But throughout the process, you'll be monitoring and controlling, and most importantly, closing out the project. The things that will happen in the initiating phase, again, those will be things like building a team, having a kickoff meeting with a proper plan, then developing a plan, which could include having a project champion, a project manager, dividing out the responsibilities, and then from there, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing. Things that project management does, they again manage temporary, non-repetitive activities, and they'll be that glue who marshals the resources, will use and manage the customer interface. In our company, that's Basecamp and Google Docs, and they'll provide direction, coordination, and integration throughout. So the project manager doesn't have to be the head of a company, and I often very much like to rotate that project management role to a variety of people, because I find that comes in handy. They must induce the right people at the right time to address the right issues and make the right decisions. So again, being that glue and finding the roles, setting up the roles accordingly. Importance of it, again, more and more, there's more knowledge out there. They say more knowledge is created in a day than may have been the previous 100 years. Uh, the triple bottom line: planet, people, and profit. You've got to be a good corporate citizen. The product life cycle, going back to the first one, is decreased so much that you can go to market pretty quickly. Companies have downsized. You've got to manage your resources better and more nimbly. Customers are more important of a focus. A customer will leave you for a breadcrumb left on a table. These days they're more demanding, and rightly so. And sometimes the biggest projects cause the smallest problems, and the smallest projects cause the biggest problems. I often say it's the $30 project that gives me more of a headache than the $300 one or the $3,000 one. So knowing the good fundamentals of project management are important. As a reminder, I have set up a chat box here in the right-hand side of the screen. So feel free to enter any messages here. And I'll be happy to get to them as well. Some of the key focuses of project management include the first one we'll cover is the triple constraint: time, scope, and cost. But we'll go in detail today to communications, risk, stakeholder analysis, and also touch on procurement and quality. Overall, these are the key focuses and things that you certainly can't ignore when putting together a good project plan and putting together and marshaling your resources accordingly. So the triple constraint, in project management lingo, that's called time, scope, and cost. But what we like to say at Braathe Enterprises, that involves time, energy, money, power, and opportunity. Your time schedule has to be clear, and you've got to meet your deadlines, and maybe build in some rewards for people for finishing on time or early. You need to know what has to happen before something else needs to happen. There are great tools out there. One of my favorites is Ganter, Gantter, which is similar to Microsoft Project, which will help you manage your timelines and schedules. Your scope, and in a smaller company, I very often find that people either underestimate or overestimate the scope of a project. And I think one of the things to keep in mind there is, you've got to look at all the variables, and that's why going in through the initiating and planning phase is ultra critical. Pardon me for just a moment. And the cost. I think having the right budget, having the right setup in place to make sure that your budget is met and exceeded where possible is ultra critical. So these three combinations together are very important. A great example I like to give of a project that met time, scope, and cost goals was the Lord of the Rings series. They had elaborate sets, very talented cast that they were paying well, and they wanted to build them build three movies at once within a reasonable budget. So rather than filming them all separately, they filmed them concurrently using similar sets and costumes, etc. They saved millions of dollars in cost. They were able to handle the bigger project because they had everything together at one time, and within that time frame, a much shorter time frame than maybe would have taken 12 years if they had to rebuild the sets, bring all the people out. Everything came together. And as I like to say, I like to expand that to time, energy, money, power, and opportunity. Are you spending the right times and the right energy and the right money on the right things? Are you giving the right power to the right people? And are you creating opportunities for others to excel? Very often, I think, especially the human resources element, we tend to neglect, having the right people on board, or rely too much on one person versus another. Why do we want to communicate? We'll talk about communications. I think the clearer you can be in your communication, the better. One of the templates I like to share with people is what we like to call a communication register. And with a communication register, it's a great resource for allowing people to know who's going to communicate to who when, and to provide a clear path to what the next step are in the communication process. So this could be as simple as having an Excel template with what type of communication it is, what type of meeting you're having, and having clear deliverables and who is responsible for those. If you're able to communicate well, you can see that meeting within your budget, meeting your time goals, and the goals themselves. Highly effective communicators do a much better job across the board. And I think the more you're able to build in those principles, and it doesn't mean you have to meet every week or every day. I remember working for an organization where we would have a daily status meeting, and we'd go through literally every book we were working on, and it just wasn't efficient because from day to day, those things weren't changing. Maybe that would have been better suited for a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting or just a report at the end of the day. When you lack communication, very often 1 out of 5 projects is unsuccessful due to ineffective communication. And keeping that in mind, you got to plan your communications, find the right methods to use. And we realized that we had too many discussions going on in our Basecamp group. And as a result of that, we had too many things going on with too many active discussions. Nobody was staying effective, and I got to hear those dreaded swear words of confused and frustrated, and the site is too busy, which I hate hearing. So we realized we had to tone our communications down and eliminate email, just use Basecamp, and then when there were specific projects we needed, dividing them up by tasks to different people that were involved. So some of the different methods you might want to be concerned about when it comes to communications. Within the project, you want to make sure that you're having good dialogue. And that could be an intranet, it could be a system of memos you use, a Google Doc you collaborate on. You got to make sure your external communication is good, an active website with accurate information, so that way the public, all the constituents, and all the stakeholders are kept in mind. Formal communication, making sure that you have reports for all the meetings you have. Informal, how do you manage all the stuff that goes outside the organization? Making sure the peer-to-peer and the organization up and down is clearly talking to each other. And knowing the difference between the effectiveness of having some off-the-record talk and some actual newsletters and annual reports. Unofficially, you want to have off-the-record communication, for things that you don't need the client to hear about, but still might be important. That can be critical. And knowing how to talk. And that's why I encourage all the time with project teams for you to make sure that you're using the best, most live method of communication possible when having a dialogue, especially on critical issues, because people can certainly hear the inflection in your voice if you are clear, and they can hear tone. A lot of your tone can indicate your anger, your stress, or the things that are really important to you. Nonverbal, how you stand. I like to say when I become president, I want to ban eye rolling and sighing, because they're just signs that people don't generally care. And similarly, your arms crossed or slouching or not looking at somebody when they're talking to you can really be misinterpreted in a project management setting. I'm just going to make sure the question and answer feature is turned on here. And as a reminder, you can use this box on the right-hand side to submit your question and answers. We'll go back to the slide deck in a minute here. Other good things to keep in mind when it comes to communication: listen actively and effectively, question and probe situations. There's nothing better than a good listener and people that ask good questions. I like to say a good question will answer three. So if you can get your probes down, whether you're interviewing potential clients, talking to each other, or really trying to find out more about somebody, knowing how to get that understanding is key when you ask a good question. Internal training is always good. And what you're all doing today, taking the time to listen into this webinar, you're educating to increase your team's knowledge of what skills are available and what tools are available for you. You should go on a fact-finding mission using best practices or to confirm your suspicions on particular topics. You should set and manage expectations with people, make sure they're clear and reinforced. Persuasion is certainly important. And you want to make sure people are internally motivated because that will encourage them, along with a good pat in the back. Coach people along the way. It's always good to give negative specific and positive specific feedback. A great job can be just as damaging as you're terrible, because it's not specific enough. Coaching to improve performance, that can be huge. You want to make sure that you're keeping a log of that coaching. Again, getting back to that point, because a lot of times if you've talked to somebody and you're a part of a management team, not everybody else may know what's going on. Negotiation skills, developing them to achieve acceptable agreements, and don't just jump into an agreement because it might not work out for you. You want to resolve conflict to prevent disruptive impacts, and that doesn't mean preventing conflict. You want good fights. And you want to summarize, recap, and identify clear next steps. In terms of communication, risk management can be important, and a risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a negative or positive effect on one or more project objectives. I think a lot of people forget about positive risk. What if we get too many customers? What if things end up going too well? They very often look at the shoe dropping, but they don't look at that situation where something goes too well. And the ways you can respond to risk, you can accept it, you can avoid it, mitigate it, or transfer it. And any of these approaches can be solid depending on how important the risk is to manage. But you should have a good risk management strategy in place in order to make sure that you're dealing with risks appropriately. And again, not every risk needs to be dealt with immediately, but it should be addressed. Here's the process. It could start with identifying a risk, putting it onto a risk log, evaluating it. You could then determine that the risk can be ended or rejected. You can develop a risk management plan. You can talk about it in meetings, monitor the risk, develop some contingencies. But along the way, you definitely want to have a matrix and a log in place where possible. And here's an example of how you can log risk. The likelihood of it happening and the impact of it happening, the risk factor, which multiplies those two numbers, who's responsible, and how you're going to respond to that risk. And I encourage all of you, with every project, looking at 7 to 10 risks that may come up. And you might say, well, this is kind of defeating the purpose of project planning if we're going this much into detail about risk, but it can be ultra critical in determining how successful your project is by how you manage your risk. A stakeholder analysis is very important to project management. In construction, sometimes they call them NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people. And that could be your local government, it could be your neighbors, it could be the people that just are against your project. It could be people that could possibly sue you. It could be potential customers, past customers, anybody at all who could be affected by your decision. And what is stakeholder management? Identifies the needs, the risks, the expectations of others, who has influence in your community, and it helps you really take into account all the qualitative and quantitative data you have on particular people that you're dealing with. Should contain things like the position of an organization, what role they've played, their contact information, what major requirements they have, whether or not they're internal or external, if they're a supporter or a resistor of the project, and it may change as time goes on. So pretty much every template in project management is going to be the kind of thing that's got to be fluid. A lot of people ask me, where do I find these templates? There's plenty available on the web. I've saved a number over the years in Excel and Word format that really helped me not have to recreate the wheel. So you literally could go to stakeholder register template and download an option that works well for you. You don't need to recreate the wheel. There's socio-cultural and technical parts of project management. Certainly leadership, problem solving, teamwork, negotiation, the kind of things that are those soft skills, maybe managing customer expectations. And then there's the technical skills or the hard skills, breaking down your work structure, having an appropriate schedule, maintaining status reports, and certainly allocating resources accordingly. I'm going to go back a couple slides. Actually, we're right where I wanted to be. So we've talked about risk, we've talked about communication and stakeholders, and now we're going to jump into quality. And quality means different things for different people. I like to tell the story of what I perceive to be a not quite yet perfect product, the Amazon Kindle reader. It was actually the Kindle Fire, which I bought about 4 or 5 years ago. It was the first one. And I bought it as a comparative product to some of the other ones I was using. And I loved it. But, it wasn't perfect. And neither is the first version of a lot of things that come out. But it was perfect enough to be a minimum viable product for people to provide. And that was the most important things was, measuring that was a product that people would buy. And then Amazon could gain some good research and development experience from asking those initial adopters, what did you like about it? What don't you like about it, et cetera. You've got to benchmark what's going on in the community. What are other people doing like you? You should know the pricing of others that sell similar products or services. You should do site visits. When I was at Disney, we'd go visit the Ritz-Carlton. When I was at Gap, we'd go visit Aeropostale or Abercrombie and just, say hello and see what was going on, and then just kind of get some ideas. And at Apple, I think probably we look at anybody that's selling electronics. And in my own company, looking at other training companies, measurements, measuring quality with metrics. How often is something failing? What are the top complaints we get? Having post-event surveys, like I'll provide after this PowerPoint and webinar today. You always should be analyzing quality. How can you do incrementally better? And sometimes it's, you're going to have those doubters. I often say that in many things in life, the best rating you can get for something is about 90%, because the other 10% either don't know you well enough or they're insane. Procurement's important. A lot of people rely so much on one provider. What if that provider is not available? You should always seek outputs and proposals from multiple vendors. Don't just go for the highest bid or the lowest bid, and have other options besides your go-to. What if that person passes away, which is horrible to think about, but you have to have a list of 5 people deep in a variety of things you like in case a provider's not available. I give the example that a grocery store that sells locally owned goods. What if a farm has a bad crop? What if a Distributors' truck breaks down. What are you going to do to have backup providers of milk, eggs, butter, produce, grocery items? What if you have a run on a particular brand of beer or soda or dog food, and you have to go to another provider? What if your top web developer decides to give up web development? You've got to keep these things in mind and have a procurement process that's fair, equitable, and gets the right amount of bids out there. Project managers need to understand the strategic management process. You've got to align your project with your mission and your goals, and make the appropriate decisions about future projects. You should have, at the end of any good project, a lessons learned report. Project managers understand their strategy, can become effective advocates aligned with the firm's mission. So strategy goes into everything related to project management, and that's oh so important. How to avoid mistakes. Again, sometimes we focus on problems or solutions with low strategic priority. Maybe it's some pointless personality conflict that you just got to get over. Maybe somebody doesn't write in the same ink that you do, or talk the same way. You have to get through those things together. Focusing on the immediate customer rather than the whole market. We might get so obsessed with one particular client because they're feeding us and they're providing us with the biggest project. It's just not effective. Overemphasizing technology. I've gone back to paper when it comes to my own personal planning. I still use Google Calendar and tools like that. But if you rely too much on an app or a resource, it might not fit with your customer's need. Trying to resolve customer issues with a product or service rather than focusing on the 80-20 rule. You might have 20% of your solution might work versus trying to dump everything you could possibly offer at that client or customer. And engage in a never-ending search for perfection. There's a lot of people that believe in Six Sigma and a lot of these quality control issues, but when it comes down to it, you want to do stuff that works well, but it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. There are a lot of good tools out there. We'll take a look at Basecamp and Ganter and a few other tools I like to use in a moment. But it helps you link the project to strategic metrics. It helps you develop proposals across a common set of criteria rather than politics or emotion. It justifies killing projects that don't support a strategy. If you've got projects that are taking too much time, it might not benefit you at all, especially if it's not bringing in any revenue. And improves communication along the way, balances risks, and gives you the opportunity to put the right resources in the right places. So let's take a look. This is one of my tools I really like called Ganter. And it's a free cloud-based project scheduling tool. You can sign up with a Google Hangout or a Google account, and it allows you to, as you can see here, integrate with cloud storage providers. You can attach links directly from your cloud storage provider to any task. You can do real-time editing using Google Drive. You can use Microsoft project files right from within it. It'll auto-save right to the cloud. And you can save copies of the project right to your Google Drive or to Ganter. You can have custom colors for different parts of the project. And it supports over 20 languages, which can come in handy. So I'm going to log into my Ganter account in just a moment here and show you the sample project that they have provided here. And I don't think I do any projects that I necessarily enjoy using Ganter for, but I think it's nonetheless nice to take a look at this because it may be something that so here it basically gives you a rough outline of the various phases of project management, and this will be a good section for review. Knowing the different knowledge areas of project management, having a clear contract, proposed state of work, looking at the environmental factors that go on at the enterprise level. And when you go into here, it'll show you what resources are available, any notes. You can also link it to other things, any risks associated with that role, and etc. Once you have the inputs, you go to the outputs of maybe developing a project charter and a scope statement. And once that initiation phase is complete, then you can go to planning. And you can see there's certain dependencies, start to finish, start to start, where some things can start and run concurrently, while other things have to take a little bit longer. So you could plan the project scope, define the scope, create a work breakdown structure, which breaks down the work into manageable components, define activities as they go along, including estimates for resource use and estimates for activities, doing some basic cost estimates, include developing a budget, completing a quality plan and an HR plan, and that could be internal and external hiring. And don't forget, if you're using internal labor, you've got to factor that into your labor costs, because what's the cost of you putting that person on a particular role or project? And we like to say, when we do a $100 or $250 an hour project, like a large workforce planning event, or facilitating a meeting and so on, what are those things that are $100 jobs that a contractor can do? What are those things that are $10 a job that an admin can do? So the $250 an hour the company gets is definitely worth the time. Going up down a little further here, managing the risk management process, having a plan, identifying the initial risks, what are the qualitative and quantitative risks of the project, and how are you going to respond to them. With procurement, plan any expected purchases and acquisitions, what contractors you're going to hire, and developing a project schedule. And then that planning phase is complete. Executing, monitoring, and controlling, and this could take a lot longer than this example gives. Having your service management lifecycle in here, direct and manage the execution, and then monitoring and controlling the project as it goes. And then closing the project with a lessons learned report and a complete contract closure. So this is Ganter with an example of the project management process as it goes on. Another website we like to use is Basecamp, and Basecamp provides you with a variety of tools, and the new Basecamp gives you the ability to ping others with direct messages. You can schedule out work as it's important. You can have what are called campfires, which are chats on certain days. Break out your to-dos and assign them to multiple people. So there's some really cool features that are involved here. We're using Basecamp 2 right now, but we like to use this tool as a great companion to what we're doing here at Braathe Enterprises. So the next steps from here, if you would like to learn more about project management, you can reach out to us at all of our contact information here, and check out some of the classes we offer at bratheenterprises.com/project management. You can also schedule a time to talk with us at meetme.so/Robert Braathe. Thank you for tuning in.